Tec Sounds presenta Territorio Negocios.
Welcome to Territorio Negocios by Gilead Business School and Tecnológico de Monterrey Undergraduate Business School. I am Jaime Martinez, and I will be your guide in this episode. Today, we explore the territory of globalization in the COVID-19 era. Is it the end of globalization as we know it? My name is Jaime Martinez, and I am the Mexico City Director of Gilead Business School. I am very excited about our guests this morning. First is Erik Musalem, who is CEO of Gilead Sciences Mexico. Erik has over 25 years of experience in biological and life sciences, with expertise in primary healthcare, rare diseases, generic medicines, and consumer healthcare products. He has worked in Europe, Asia, and America in global organizations such as Sanofi Genzyme, Boehringer Ingelheim, Pfizer, and Roche. For the past 3 years, Erik has led Gilead Sciences Mexico, a biopharmaceutical company focused on the research, development, and commercialization of innovative therapies in medical areas with unmet needs, and with the mission of advancing the care of patients suffering from life-threatening diseases. Erik graduated from ITAM in business management, and he holds an MBA degree from Texas A&M University and a PhD degree in organizational development by the Southeast Asia Interdisciplinary Development Institute. Erik, so great to have you.
Thank you very much, Jaime.
Thank you. Then we have from our faculty, Evodio Kaltenecker, who is international faculty member at Escuela de Negocios in Gilead Business School. Evodio is responsible for research and executive education in several international programs in management. In addition to his faculty role in Tec de Monterrey, Evodio is faculty in residence at the Austral Educational Group, guest lecturer at the Management Center in Innsbruck, Austria, research fellow at the Emerging Markets Institute at Cornell University, and faculty at the BBS Business School in Angola. Evodio is also a member of the advisory board of Core Analytics, an institution focused on the study and management of political risks, and a published author. Evodio holds a degree in metallurgical engineering from the Military Engineering Institute, a master in production engineering from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, an MBA from Harvard Business School, and a PhD in strategy and internationalization of multinational companies from the Polytechnic School of the University of Sao Paulo. Again, Evodio, we are delighted to have you in today's discussion. So let's begin delving into today's topic, globalization in the COVID-19 era. And I'd like to give a little context to what we'll be discussing. In the year 2000, German sociologist Ulrich Beck claimed that globalization was irreversible. Yet 20 years later, this widely known and accepted affirmation, at least, has been profoundly questioned. COVID has disrupted globalization, dramatically reducing the flow of people, trade, and capital. Will new supply chains emerge? Will the local become the new global? In today's episode, we are addressing the challenges of a world increasingly global that in a matter of weeks has witnessed aggressive state intervention, the closing of borders, a restriction in physical movement, and of course, social distancing. So I'd like to start with Erik Musalem. Erik, what do you believe will be the new rules of the game for globalization in a post-pandemic era?
Thank you very much, Jaime, and thank you also for the invitation to this great podcast. First on the topic of globalization, I've been reflecting on the topic that you sent us in regards to what's the future of globalization. I personally believe that globalization still is irreversible. Why do I think so? Because first of all, you have a massive penetration of digital, and internet and information democratization, right? So even though you might have some trends that are against globalization, like protectionist governments, in particular the decline of the U.S. global leadership arena, Certainly, I believe, Jaime and Evodio, that globalization will continue due to the interconnectedness of the world. And I do believe that on the long run, we will see more and more governments continue cooperating through international means. Now, what are the new rules of the game in the post COVID era? First of all, I do believe that we need to adopt a flexible mindset and evolve with the environment. I believe as part of these massive changes, we will see companies that really adapt properly to the new realities and others that are still married with the past practices. So I do believe a thorough revision of business models, structures, and governance will be needed in order to thrive under the new reality.
And that's interesting because at Agave Business School, that's exactly what we do, especially now with the influence of technology stronger than ever. It's questioning all the business models, even the successful ones from the past, to find out what works best for such a challenging present and future. Now, Evodio, I feel that Erik is optimistic about the stay of these structural forces in favor of globalization. As an expert in emerging markets, does that seem accurate to you?
Thank you, Jaime. Yes, I agree with Eric. Yes, I'm positive about the globalization. It's a little bit premature to say that globalization is dead. It is not. What we are starting is a new phase of globalization. Some people, I myself, we call it globalization 2.0. Okay, it will be a different phase of globalization, but still we are in the mood of globalization. In my opinion, Jaime, the differences I want to stress three main differences. First, from a supply chain perspective, those global production networks or global value chain, they are shaping, they are morphing into they'll be more focused on resilience instead of efficiency. Remember, we put big chunk of global manufacturing in China because managers were focused on efficiency. They're looking for low cost and speed. And I think COVID-19 accelerated a trend that global managers, are thinking about bringing back. It's too risky to put everything in only one country, all production in only one country. So we believe that we're going to see a reconfiguration of globalization. New supply chains will be focused on resilience and be more geographically diversified. Okay, so in my very humble opinion, I I think we are still in the globalization mode, but a different form of globalization.
Uh,
And the days of manufacturing everything in China, those days tend to be over. So we will see more uh, production elsewhere, and some people calling reshoring. Okay.
Exactly, and that also reminds me of how many companies are evolving from what used to be just on time to just in case, right? So that they are much more prepared. And that geographic diversification of supply chains would also has its geopolitical underside, no? Which makes geopolitics, which is also I know an area of expertise of you, doubly relevant as companies, again, as you say, rely on not just one country for their offshoring, but will depend on many more, which will increase and make much more complex the relations with their supply chains and the countries and global players in those chains. Now, do you think that some countries, and here I'm thinking of Mexico, but I mean you could certainly address any other continent and country. Do you think, Evodio, that some countries are better positioned to take advantage of this reshoring that you're mentioning and this diversification of supply chains?
Good question. Good question, Jaime. Yes, let's start with our beloved Mexico. I think Mexico is well positioned to take advantage of these reshoring globalization 2.0 strategy because of the Mexico's connections with the United States. They are linked for good and forever. So Mexico is very well positioned to take advantage of this new strategy. Strong ties to the US, geographically very well positioned with access both to Atlantic to the Pacific. So Mexico is clearly Mexico. has a potential to benefit from globalization 2.0. And some other countries as well, I think that the other countries that are going to benefit are the countries that lost somehow manufacturing jobs to or lose some of their manufacturing jobs to China. So I think some advanced economies like the US and some countries in Europe.
And now, has this what Evodio is describing, Eric? Do you believe that Gilead has experienced a similar situation where your global supply chains are perhaps now being diversified previously than more than before?
Uh, Thank you, Jaime. I reacting first with Evodio's comment. I fully agree. I think Mexico is very well positioned to capitalize on the reshoring. However, there are some controllables by the Mexican government that I think need to be activated. Providing certainty to business, and certainly establishing the proper governance on different aspects of the country will certainly help for us to capitalize. Now, in terms of Gilead, certainly Gilead is the affiliate that is closer to our headquarters in Foster City, California. And certainly we have seen a tremendous opportunity to partner with the government locally in order to provide healthcare to the largest number of Mexicans in the country.
Excellent. Now, you've already stated your position, Eric, quite optimistically in terms of globalization being an increasing trend that we'll continue to see despite current measures to the contrary. But I'd like to insist a little bit about this point. We're seeing increased regulation. We're seeing trade wars between very large economies. We're seeing perhaps momentary or temporal, we would hope, sanitary filters. And maybe filter is putting it mildly. No, we're talking about flights across many countries right now being still canceled at the time of this episode. So to a certain extent, there seems to be a lot of pressure on what used to be the globalized paradigm or the globalization paradigm. Are there any alarms or any aspects of the current events that concern you that you think should be cause for alarm, that we should be worried about? And this question is for both of you.
Thank you, Jaime. I certainly feel a major milestone is approaching with the re-election or the intermediary election on the US, because when we analyze really what are these drivers for protectionism, I think they were self-inflicted pain due to the US increased tendency for protectionism and renegotiation of treaties, right? So to me, the ultimate question, and I would love to hear also Evodio's opinion on this, will really strongly rely on what will be the role of the US, who gets elected, and what will be the position on the US in the global leadership arena. Because the number one champion for free trade has been the US. And surprisingly, over the last few years, we have seen a reversal in this sense, right? So I think that's why this is a major milestone. I don't know, Evodio, what is your opinion?
Uh, Thank you, Eric. Yes. Um, those the filters that Jaime mentioned, they clearly hurt globalization and the good things that comes with it. Okay, like innovation, access to better living, better jobs. Okay, so but it's interesting that we were all of us in this podcast, we were raised in a world where the champion for free trade was the US, and nowadays what we see that the country that benefit the most from globalization is China. Okay, and US taking a step back in supporting liberal policies. Um, we tend to see maybe clearly with the if Biden wins or maybe a Trump 2.0, another version, uh, we expect the United States to join more liberal policies in the next 4 years after the election, regardless the win. But clearly, one of the candidates they have an open agenda towards liberal policies. I am concerned. Uh, COVID 19 just accelerated some forces that decreased globalization. So, COVID 19 is just an additional force force that decreases globalization. Think of nationalistic movements in Hungary, Brexit, the election of Mr. Trump in the US, and also
Well,
some policies.
Evodio, amongst the factors that you're mentioning, I would certainly mention the sense or the perception that there's been a disenfranchisement of a big segment of the population of many of these countries that we thought were winners in sort of the liberal economic paradigm, that have led to a political backlash. No, that is in some senses expressed itself as what we would call populism. But I would just add that to the list of factors you were mentioning.
No, no, you're right. You're right, Jaime. Because one of the problems is the with globalization is that the benefits are unevenly spread. So some countries and some parts of region in certain countries benefit much more from globalization than the others, and then this resentment happened. Thinking of, for instance, Brexit was a kind of surprise, right? So Londoners, those urban population and young, they loved globalization. But if you drive through 3 hours apart from London, you're going to see resentment, people rejecting this idea of globalization. So we do hope that the globalization 2.0, which will be a stronger sense of location. So it's a kind of difficult to understand. It's a globalization, but with a kind of regional focus. We hope that the benefits of globalization be spread more between more people. Okay, so this is one of the things that we expect from to sustain a peaceful world under a geopolitical framework.
And that is certainly a function of governments, but it's also an opportunity for organizations, for businesses, for social entrepreneurs to help develop mechanisms to incorporate many people who have not won as much or have openly lost from this greater economic integration. That's something that we cover also as a business school, which is how these social and economic challenges, opportunities can be addressed through businesses, whether they're startups or large corporations. In addition, of course, to the very important work of governments. Now, gentlemen, I'd like to mention that my perception that leaders, at least in the Americas, are treating COVID-19 as a seemingly a temporary situation, and are seemingly hoping for a return to business as usual once a vaccine appears. No, and we've had news, of course, of different countries and different laboratories, and certainly I'll in a few minutes I'll mention some of the news involving Gilead, which I think is very positive. But what do you think are the risks in terms of our development, of our long-term planning, of our competitiveness as countries, and in those who have leaders who are embracing this thought again that the COVID situation is merely temporary and it's magically going away as soon as a vaccine is released? If you like, I'd start with you, Evodio, and then go to Eddie.
Okay, thank you, Jaime. Good point. Yes, I think this is a major risk. People may think, okay, once we get the vaccine, and then life is going to return to the same way it was before. Totally wrong. I do not believe in this. Okay, so companies, there are risks for companies. They may think that the risk for those companies that they think that their customers will be the same customers they served in the past. It's a different customer. From they spend their money in a different way. Entertainment will be different. The way they eat will be different. The allocation of resources in their homes and the houses will be different. Okay, those customers will be way less faithful to their old brands. It's an we're living in a different world, so they are open. The customers are open to try different styles or different solutions for their needs. So it's an opportunity for other brands. Um, Also, from a supply chain perspective, again, companies may think that the efforts to digitalize their supply chains are done and gone. No, the way they deal with the suppliers is going to be different because of the several things that we discussed. Remember, globalization 2.0 is just a part of capitalism 2.0. Jaime, you mentioned it, it's not up to the governments only to deal with this different world. So companies will be required to think not only from a shareholder perspective, but to have a better and bigger view, think about stakeholders' perspective. I think COVID-19 just accelerated this issue that companies they need to operate in a different way. Okay, because we're going to live in a different world.
Thank you, Evodio. And Erik, from your perspective as a CEO of a transnational company, what is your take? Are these going to be permanent changes, and how difficult will it be, or and is it being for companies to adapt?
Yes, Jaime, certainly. I think the main problem is that most companies are thinking when we return, and you rightly mentioned as a short-term event, right? And we will return to usual. I think the question is the wrong question. The question is not when we will return, but how do I return to a new reality and gain competitive advantage as a result of the situation? And I think, as companies, we need to start asking ourselves the right question, which is how will become more competitive after COVID, right? Now, let me put the example of the pharmaceutical industry, right? Most of our business model has been traditional by detailing doctors face to face, right? And the key question is how will you incorporate these new elements into your business and promotional model once doctors have become used to getting e-detailing from representatives of pharma companies, right? So the companies that will excel, of course, will be the ones that adapt better their promotional and business model to these new realities. Of course, you will have the core, which is innovation and the pipelines as being the driving force for pharma companies. But certainly, the companies that take the extra mile to really think of competitive advantages will be the ones that thrive.
And it seems like there's going to be two waves. There's one wave right now, currently, of businesses being, many of them being negatively affected, especially those that did not begin their transformation earlier, and they're being affected by the current situation of quarantine and social distancing and the drop in economic activity. But for those companies that didn't do those changes and are sitting out this period thinking that it's magically going to end and things are going to go back to the way they were, they're going to be hit by a second wave, which is when things improve. Eventually, there's going to be a rebound in the global economy, as we all expect. And then the companies that did embrace those changes, either before or during this COVID-19 period, so to speak, will then have a definite advantage to those that sort of slept out this transition. So I think it's imperative that companies embrace this competitive, this reimagining, this use of technology, as you've both said, and it's certainly something that we're evangelizing, so to speak, from Agave Business School. Speaking of vaccines, news is, of course, that Gilead and Pfizer are teaming up to produce remdesivir, a drug that has been proven to reduce mortality due to COVID-19. And this, I think, is a great example of innovation and global cooperation between competitors of the same industry, which doesn't happen that often. As a question to both of you, and I'm trying to be optimistic here, do you think the pandemic can lead to more long-term cooperation between global players? And if you like, we'll start with you, Erik, because I mean, of course, your company is subject of this news, and move on to you, Evodio.
Yes, Jaime, I certainly believe, Evodio mentioned it very well. I think COVID has been an accelerator, right? And certainly, I think it has accelerated cooperation, at least on the pharmaceutical area. And I hope in other areas or industries will do so, We have cooperated with Pfizer, with other generic players to really speed up the manufacturing of remdesivir. And I think this is a good example, of how COVID can also be an acceleration of the much needed changes in society. We have seen a neglecting of global climate change, for example. We have also seen the important need for capitalism to get it right in terms of sustainability, equality, right? So I think this could be an example of COVID accelerating some of the much needed changes in the global business world.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of room for cooperative innovation, even amongst players that continue to be competitors, but that find that by joining efforts, they can really lead to breakthrough developments that benefit everyone. And as they say, lift the tide for all boats, no, so to speak. Evodio, do you think that we'll also be seeing cooperation between companies, more cooperation after the COVID-19 phase? And do you think that might actually be a response to some of the lack of cooperation we're seeing at the government level? So we're kind of compensating on the side of the private sector.
Yeah, totally right, Jaime. Yes, I do see cooperation, and Gilead is a great example, company to company. So even those very large multinationals, they do not have all the resources, tangible, intangible, to tackle great problems. And I also think, and a little bit of optimistic, a little bit wishful thinking, but we have reasons to believe that we're going to see more cooperation between governments and companies. Okay, why? Most of the problems that we have in the 21st centuries are global problems. They should be tackled in a different way. It's not only a single company trying to do this or XYZ. Think of climate change, terrorism, and even the pandemic itself, cybercrimes. Okay, they have little respect for borders, country level borders. Okay, so we see some trends, and COVID is helping us cooperation in government slash company levels. Okay, and to to tackle those very large problems we are going to see during this century. Okay, so I'm positive about cooperation, not only company level, but also not only company to company, but also governments to companies as well.
And I'm interested in your take. As we develop leaders and we encourage leaders to be more long-term thinking and more cooperative, again, with other companies and also with government. Do you think that there has to be a change or an adjustment in the psychology of our typical leader, which sees marketplace competition as a zero-sum game, no? And it's my company against yours. Do you think there has to be some change in the mindset that as a business school we should be encouraging? And this is open to any of the two of you.
I'll start from here and then give an opportunity to the smartest person in the room, Eric, to say something. Yes, Jaime, I think that business schools, we do have an important role to open up the minds that post World War concept that I need to kill my enemy to survive, and as you mentioned, the zero sum game. Okay, there is room. The world is moving to a different direction, and our role as educators of leaders in business and government is to explain, to develop this different mindset. Okay, it's very hard to believe. Okay, that from now on we are going to trust the CEO, and he or she says, "I love the society. I'm really concerned with my employees," and all of a sudden he or she fires 70% of his or her workforce. It's not going to happen. Okay, the message that we expect from those leaders is more coherence and open view, an inclusive view of the society, not only seeing us as customers, but also seeing us as partners to solve global problems. Okay, so business schools, we do have a role, an important role to develop those leaders, and I think that the GAD is very well positioned to do so.
Yes, and I think at Agave we could pretty much develop, in fact, a business case that we could use in our future classes, um, describing and analyzing Gilead's very progressive actions in terms of this cooperation. Erik, is there anything you'd like to add to this point in particular before we move on to the next question?
Thank you, Jaime. Well, a brief comment on the important roles of business schools, right? I think we see a crisis, a global crisis in terms of business values, ethical values in industries, different industries. I think certainly business schools have a critical role in reminding executives through executive education and other means, of the importance of having a long-term orientation and values. Believe me, once you are working every day in trying to drive corporate results, you see many hurdles against living the company values and universal values. So certainly I think this role cannot be understated. Business schools certainly become an important source of championing good values in the business place.
Yes, and I think that's a very positive change that we should all welcome. Just recently, EGADE published a decalogue, which with 10 actions for the refounding of the economy and the business sector of Mexico. We have a global audience, of course, but this is a project that relates to the challenges that Mexico, like many other countries, is facing. For those of us listening to us that speak Spanish, it's el Decálogo para la Refundación Económica Empresarial de Mexico, and you can find it in English and Spanish. And I think it portrays this sense that as a business school, we should be tackling these challenges of seeking to align technology, society, the educational sector, and government as well. So let's move on to the closing section of our capsule, which has been incredibly interesting. I think we could go on for the most of the day discussing these topics. Erik, just a couple of weeks ago, Mexico's Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, announced that our country is going to enter phase 3 of the COVID-19 vaccine development that is underway by Sanofi Pasteur. What do you think this means for Mexico, and what should we, being realistically, expect?
Well, I think these are great news. The fact that AstraZeneca and Oxford, for example, recently announced this partnership with the Carlos Slim Foundation, I think is tremendous news, Jaime and Evodio. I think this eventually, as we were discussing, is an example of cooperation. And I believe my current scenarios are a second semester recovery in 2021, second semester of 2021. We have seen with remdesivir that COFEPRIS takes a little bit of time really to approve drugs, even if we're in the middle of the pandemic. So I would certainly see, a Q4 phase 3 release of vaccine of Oxford and probably other players that we have seen in the market. And considering, the time for approvals and the time for supply chains to do their job and eventually start immunizations, I would think of a second semester slowly but surely recovering to activities.
Okay, well, thank you. And let's not waste, and this is a call to everyone in the audience, let's not waste this opportunity to truly reinvent ourselves, think long term, think of ourselves as global citizens, whether we're working at corporations, as faculty members, as leaders of educational institutions. Again, thank you so much. And this episode, I'd like to remember all of you that we had Erik Musalem, CEO of Gilead Sciences Mexico, and Evodio Kaltenecker, international faculty member at Escuela de Negocios en EGADE Business School at Tecnológico de Monterrey. This was exploring the territory of globalization in the COVID-19 era, and whether it is or not, and probably not, as we discussed in this episode, the end of globalization as we know it. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for future podcasts in this very interesting program that we have, Territorio Negocios. Thank you. Thank you for listening to an episode of Territorio Negocios, a podcast by EGADE Business School, Tecnológico de Monterrey Undergraduate Business School, and Tec Sounds. Executive Producer Miguel Mejía, Production Assistant Marcelo Segura, Territorio Negocios Producers Luis Vargas, Tirana del Castillo, Francisco Coria, Carla Díaz, Desiree Ukobitz, and Santiago Velázquez. Post-production Max Pérez. Listen to the next episode of Territorio Negocios and all of Tec Sounds shows at Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and tech.mx/tech-sounds.